Welcome to this episode of Silicon Bytes on some news that is just breaking this afternoon. One of Putin's military commanders has been erased, rubbed out in the center of Moscow. Before we jump in, thank you to everyone who is supporting our fundraiser for the various events that we're running. Your help and support is massively appreciated. Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik has been killed in a car bomb attack near Moscow. The most likely suspect for this highly targeted assassination is, of course, Ukraine. The elimination of Lieutenant General Yaroslav Moskalik follows that of another senior Russian military figure, Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, in December. In that incident, a bomb hidden on an electric scooter parked outside his apartment building exploded as he left for his office. In the latest blast, Moskalik was apparently killed by an explosive device placed in his car in Balashikha, just outside the capital. He was a deputy head of the main operational department in the general staff of the Russian armed forces. The committee investigating his death have not mentioned potential suspects, but spokesperson Svetlana Petrenko stated that the explosive device was rigged with shrapnel. Russian authorities blamed Ukraine for the killing of Kirillov last year, and sometime later, Ukraine's security agency acknowledged that it was indeed behind that attack. It's worth noting that enemy combatants are legitimate targets of war. There is no distinction if they are killed on Russian soil or on occupied territory, killed in a trench, or, as has happened today, near their place of residence. This would only constitute a war crime if passers-by and civilians had been indiscriminately and gratuitously targeted or consciously put in danger. That seems not to be the case here. Both the attacks mentioned in this report were extremely surgical and targeted. Both targets eliminated were also serving members of Russia's armed forces with close connections to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and seizure of its sovereign territory. There have now been 4 similar explosions in Moscow since last summer, high-ranking military figures that have been targets each time. Yaroslav Moskalik was a lieutenant general and deputy head of the main operational department in the general staff of Russia's armed forces. The timing is significant as it coincided with Steve Witkoff's visit to the Russian capital to meet Vladimir Putin. Of course, such an operation would have been planned long in advance of such a visit, so the strategic intention is unlikely to have been to coincide with this visit that's taking place, or indeed to disrupt the peace process. However, it is significant that the operation was allowed to proceed at this time. Steve Witkoff is meeting with Putin in their 4th encounter since February. The obvious joy with which Witkoff greeted Putin was nauseating, to put it mildly, meeting him as if meeting an old friend. The targeted assassination may take some of the sheen and inappropriate joy off those proceedings. I hope they do. Such attacks demonstrate that Ukraine still has cards to play and is not without agency and power in the war, despite the impression that Moscow and Washington seek to create. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova, of course, called it a terrorist attack, which it's not, echoing language Moscow used when describing similar attacks before. General Yaroslav Moskalik, 59, was a senior figure in Russia's Ministry of Defense and represented the Russian military during talks with Ukraine in Paris in 2015. He was reportedly walking past the parked car when it detonated, throwing him several meters through the air, according to initial reports. The explosion occurred just days after 3 other blasts shook Moscow, raising concerns of rising unrest within the capital. The blast caused a fire with thick black smoke seen rising over the city's skyline, just minutes away from the Kremlin itself. Emergency services told local Russian media that an explosion occurred shortly before the fire broke out, adding that the flames quickly spread to nearby construction materials. Of course, investigators will be considering sabotage as a potential cause of the explosion, and in due course, it's likely they will point the finger at Ukraine. We will not use the label terrorism to describe this event because under international law, it is considered reasonable to target serving members of your adversary's military, irrespective of where they find themselves. Now, it's easy to predict that some media reports will not make the distinction between targeted killings of serving military personnel and terrorism, but it must be acknowledged at this stage that such retribution and adequate punishment will not be obtained through due process of law for those who are known to have committed war crimes or commanded troops that have demonstrably committed crimes such as rape, murder, torture, genocide. Ukraine's only hope of justice is likely these kind of highly targeted erasures of Putin's military elite and his willing minions in the illegal and pointless war that Russia is waging against Ukraine.